My name's James Bowen. I live in the north of England. I'm a musician, singer-songwriter. I'm also an educator, and I like to think that I'm an all-round troublemaker on various levels, hopefully making the world a better place rather than a worse one. Now, I would like to talk today a little bit about anarcho folk fests, which have been happening particularly over the last 10 years or so across Europe, in various different places, and I'm involved as one of the organisers of the Scottish Anarcho Folk Fest, which takes place in the north of Scotland near Elgin, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what is an Anarcho Folk Fest, what are we talking about there, what is anarcho folk, I suppose, which is kind of quite important, and then I'm going to look at some of the practical considerations that you might want to take into account if you would like to put on one of these events. It's very possible. There's a few things you might need to have in place, but I will talk through some of the ideas behind it. Now, principally, on an economic level, I think the anarchist movement is not succeeding, particularly economically or politically. However, on a cultural level, we're always at the forefront. We always make things happen. We're always creative. And to be honest, often we're the best at having a lot of fun. Anarcho folk fests are supposed to be quite a lot of fun, as well as being quite educational, politically engaged, and somewhere where lots of people are welcome to come and share ideas, maybe learn from each other, and also listen to some really good music. So I'm going to play a few intros to songs just to sort of break up the presentation. This first one comes from a song of mine called Time and Place, and it goes like this. Okay, so the history of anarcho folk fests. Over the last 10 years, some people have got together. I've been doing a lot of gigs all over Europe. A lot of other people have been too, mixing with a lot of interesting political and like-minded individuals. There's a big anti-fascist sentiment behind a lot of it, and various people have put together festivals. A couple of them have been in the Netherlands, one in the city of Amsterdam, and one a little bit outside the city of Amsterdam at a place called the ADM, which was a massive squat where loads of people lived, and those were in, I think, 2013 and 2018. There have been a couple in London around times of the book fair, actually, at Freedom Bookshop in the yard outside Freedom Books, and also at the Lark, the London Action Resource Centre, which I've been to. The ones in Scotland, we did a small one in 2015 and then 16 and 17. We were supposed to have one this year, 2020, which was of course cancelled. So we're hoping to do it all again next year. And then last year in 2019, there was one in Wolumiec in Poland, right on the Polish-Czech-German border. And there was also one in Dublin in 2019 as well, last August. All of which have been a real pleasure to be at and to play at and to participate in. So, an anarcho folk fest is essentially about DIY culture. It's about putting it all together ourselves to do something. You know, there's no big business behind it. It's done not for profit, although we do make an effort, particularly in the Scottish ones, to pay people the money if they need it. So that includes musicians who are trying to make a living doing it. Also sound guys and, you know, other people who put together the infrastructure. A lot of people waive their fee and let it go, but some people get paid something, but it's mostly to cover your costs and possibly a little bit extra. The only commercial thing at our festivals tends to be band merch, and there are a couple of festival t-shirts that have been available to buy as well, which have been produced by the organisers. I think I've got one from Wolumiec in Poland and one from Amsterdam at the ADM, and I think in Scotland we're going to try and do some next time. Anyway, so reading from my notes, it goes without saying that racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, fascism and other oppressive ideas are completely unwelcome at the festivals, and they will be and should be challenged. The idea is to create a free and welcoming space for everybody based on ideas of participation, shared ownership, creativity and DIY culture and personal responsibility. This always can be a source of conflict because some people say, well, okay, it's my freedom to do this, that and the other. Other people say, well, that's oppressive behaviours. That's always going to be an issue, I think, when you put on an event which has got more than a few people at. And we try to do that in Scotland by having a team of people who just keep an eye on things, try and facilitate things, keep things rolling. If there's something that we feel has happened that's out of order, we will try and work with that, talk to the people involved and all the rest of it. This is a much bigger issue than I'm going to go into today because, of course, if you ever organise any kind of event, you'll realise that different opinions, different ideas come to the fore and you can have conflict. Anyway, that's not the main point about the festivals. Most of the stuff about the festivals is it's not about conflict, it's actually about people having a great time together and doing all sorts of different things and being really creative. One of the things that we've noticed in Scotland, which has been possibly different from some of the ones in the Netherlands and in Poland, is that you get a lot more people who aren't necessarily fully engaged with the radical scene or even radical politics, but they broadly agree with the ideas, but they're not kind of educated anarchists, if you like. So we try and take that into account and say, right, okay, yeah, you come as who you are, and as long as we all act in reasonable ways, we behave in reasonable ways, we learn from each other, we discuss, we share ideas, and again, we have a good time. And of course, there is the other issue that if you mix in a bit of booze, possibly a bit of other intoxicants, people do silly things, and that always has to be kept an eye on in terms of kind of keeping it all together. So I'll come on to that about kind of what we do in terms of security and the like. So we're trying to be inclusive, we're trying to be international, we're trying to be challenging, thought-provoking on a musical, cultural and political level. And we don't all want to just come along and agree with each other and say, yeah, everyone agrees with that. We also don't necessarily put on music that everyone's going to like. The whole point is to have a real variety. That's one of the things we try to do in Scotland. We also like the idea of offering stages to musicians who perhaps don't find a natural audience very easily. Like in the commercial music biz, sometimes it's quite hard if you play some kind of music that's quite challenging. I find that as a singer-songwriter, I write my own songs. There is an audience for it, but sometimes it's quite hard to find. But the other thing that we really, really want to do, and particularly in Scotland, we've tried to push for, is the idea that it's not just a music festival. It's not just a case of let's meet together for a weekend, we all go camping, we all get pissed and we all have a wild time and we go and listen to some great music. What we want as well, and I think at all the Anarcho Folk Fests, is a big dose of politics, because that's something that is often missing from this sort of festival sort of scene and festival culture. So we have a big strand in our festival, which is all about workshops, where we discuss different things, people demonstrate different things, we learn from each other. So I suppose I could play you another intro and then we'll go into what is Anarcho Folk. Now there's a big question. Right, so if you've had to think about that, what is Anarcho Folk? Well, quite honestly, it's an unanswerable question, of course. It's all sorts of different things, because you could argue that it's about politically engaged music. Yeah, but then how do you tell if music's politically engaged? If the lyrics are politically engaged, may well be. But then, of course, as an international movement, I suppose, sometimes we all sing in languages that not everybody understands. I mean, it tends to be that the shared language across Europe, across the world, I suppose, is English. A lot of folk musicians sing in all sorts of other languages and dialects. So you could argue that anarcho folk is all about playing music and using folky instruments and possibly playing acoustic and all the rest of it, with an element of political songwriting. But there are also people who play instrumental songs. There are people who play trad songs, you know, taken from traditional cultures or traditional ideas of music. So most of the musicians that we have are original musicians who play original music, original songs, original compositions. But there are a lot of people who also play, like I say, traditional stuff or stuff that comes from elsewhere. So, what I'd say is, you know, it's an unanswerable question. Anarcho folk is more of an attitude than anything else. And I think that most of the people who've played at all the anarcho folk fests that I've been to have all shared certain ideas of anti-authoritarianism, DIY creativity, DIY culture, trying to play music to change the world, to make the world a better place. We're all at different levels, different stages on the journey there. But anyway. But it's all about sharing. It's all about, you know, sometimes the music isn't joyful, and sometimes the music is quite challenging. Sometimes you really have to listen. But the point is, we also want to create a real creativity of culture. So the principles behind an anarcho folk fest. So the idea is to create a political event that celebrates DIY culture. It's not for profit, but as I say, some people do get paid something. We also try to be as sustainable and green as possible, with camping, vegan food, so everybody can eat it, avoiding as much waste as possible and recycling what we can, people taking personal responsibility for their actions, sharing ideas, sharing food, sharing music, and probably most important of all, sharing conversation, whether they be in workshops or just round the fire or other situations. And in Scotland we are hopefully moving towards a more sustainable idea, you know, with more composting toilets, less food waste, encouraging everyone to sort of participate and make it their own thing. I know that some festivals as well manage to do it also with alternative power sources. I'm afraid we plug into the mains, but that's a long-term goal, is possibly to look at the ideas of doing things using, you know, solar or wind powered. I know there's over the years there have been lots of green festivals and stuff which do that, and yeah, let's move towards that. So if anybody's out there thinking, I know how to do that, get in touch, because we'd love to hear from you. Right, so in Scotland we originally proposed to make our festival a free or a donation or pay what you like event. But this proved problematic because it meant that we weren't really able to, firstly, plan for how many numbers of people were going to come, because one of the things that happens, of course, is people say, yeah, I'll come, and then we've got the maximum amount of numbers. We work to a number of probably having on site no more than 250 people, of which 60, 70 might be the musicians, the workshoppers, the crew, and all the rest of it. But the problem is, if people haven't paid, then suddenly they say, oh, I can't be asked, and they don't turn up. There's also the point that you know, there is an outlay. There is a financial cost to putting on an event such as ours. It makes it very hard to plan ahead if you have no idea what kind of budget you're working towards. So what we try and do then is we work with a budget of something between, or have done over the years, the first one was just a small kind of one-day party. Now we have a 3-day festival, working with an overall budget of something between £5,000 and £7,000. So we sell tickets at a sliding scale of £35 to £45 to £55, so that people can decide how much they want to pay. You don't get anything extra if you pay more. but you just get that warm glow in your heart to think, oh, I supported it more, because the idea is that them that can't afford it should be able to come, and them that can afford more should pay more, and I think that's reasonable. I don't think any of us can argue with that. And we also have a bit of a caveat that if somebody really, really can't afford to pay to come, then we'll find a space for them on the crew or something, and at least make sure that as many of the people who should be there get to be there within the limits of the numbers. So if you would like to see our accounts, of course, we're willing to let you we'll email them to you if you want to have a look at what our costs are. The majority of the costs go on actually paying for the bands and expenses, the sound systems that we have. So we have 2 venues with a PA system, and obviously all the costs that go with that. Some of our biggest costs have also been to do things like toilets. We bought in portaloos, and we've obviously trying to make it accessible. We've also included disabled toilets, sort of wheelchair accessible toilets. We're working on this in terms of trying to have on-site, possibly compost toilets that work, because there is a compost toilet, but obviously once you've start to have 200 plus people, you might need a few more toilets. So anyway, that's another one of our work in progresses. So what I will go on to is the practical considerations of putting on one of these festivals. So in Scotland, we're extremely fortunate that we have a site available to us, and the person who owns the site is completely on side and is in fact part of the organisational team, a guy called Jim. And on that site there is a barn which serves as a venue. There is also a lot of the other infrastructure that we need, because there's electricity out to the barns, there is running water on site, and we also have access to other things like marquees and furniture, like sofas and eating tables and smaller tents and workshop tents and all the rest of it, either for free because they're on site already and are owned by people who are already involved in the organisation, or at a fairly cheap cost or at cost price. So actually, if you were going to put on an event like this, I'd say that's one of the important things, is to firstly find a good site, but also try and make that as cheap as possible, because I know that can be a massive expenditure to rent a site like that for the weekend. We don't have to, so a lot of our stuff is on site already, and that makes it much cheaper for us to put it on. I would point out that it is worth checking your local legal restrictions and licensing laws. In Britain, these can be quite strict, and you don't want your festival closed down just as it starts because someone decides they don't like the sound of it and they find that you are breaking some local law or whatever. So for that reason, we don't sell any booze on site, no alcohol. We encourage people to bring your own, bring whatever your poison is, and enjoy yourself, but we won't sell you it. And our food stuff is done by donation, so we're not actually selling food. And obviously it's a private site, so effectively we can claim that it's a private party. And I believe in Britain mostly the limitations are, if you have an event that's more than 500 people, then you have to start looking at public liability and all the rest of it. There's lots of grey areas. Check with your local council and see what you can find out. If you have one in mind, again, we can share some of our ideas and some of our discoveries if you're interested. So our festival is broken down into 4 main parts in terms of organisation. You've got the site and the infrastructure that goes with that. So that obviously takes quite a lot of setting up before the event happens, and a lot of takedown after the event happens. So you need a sizable crew, well, a few people at least, who are willing to work quite hard to set up your gate and your gate crew, water, toilets, electricity, lights, medical. You need to take into account what happens if somebody does get sick or has an accident or worse. What the hell are you going to do? Fortunately, we've only had one ambulance on site at the Scottish Anarcho Folk Fest where somebody fell off somebody's shoulders and injured herself, and we had an ambulance had to come on site. We have also been visited by the local police, but usually they come in, come up, have a look, check it's all right, check nobody's doing anything too dangerous, and let us go. I can imagine what many people's attitude will be towards that, but my attitude when we are organising an event like this is you kind of have to get on with them, whether you like them or not. So we've also got the different venues being set up. We have a fire pit, we have lighting around the site as well as stage lighting. We have signposting, and we have blackboards to tell people what's happening and if things change. So all that needs to be set up usually beforehand. The workshopping strand tends to be organised that you have a facilitator who coordinates everything, and then the different workshoppers come along and they have different venues where they put on their workshops, which may be a rolling idea, or it may be for an hour, it may be for longer than that. I'll go into what some of the workshops have been in a minute. Then there's the food. The food, first time or the first couple of times in Scotland, we didn't do any sort of shared food. We had a kitchen tent where people could come and cook their own stuff or heat up water or whatever. And there was a food sharing table, which is something we've kept to. But the last times we've done it, we also had a food crew who obviously far ahead had to plan a menu, plan exactly what the quantities of food were going to be. I know there's lots of people, particularly across Europe, there's various activist kitchens, I think you'd call them, who go and work at demonstrations and big activist events to feed anything between 5,000 and 5,000 people. It's useful talking to guys like those about how to actually feed. We're talking about, again, 100 to 200 people. It's relatively easy if you get organised, but you do need crew volunteers, you need people to do the hard work, you need people to do the cooking, and of course work out how you're going to do cleaning up and sorting out and washing up, and whether you use shared cutlery and stuff. I mean, one thing we've done is said bring your own bowls and cutlery, and you sort yourself out, which most people did, and we obviously have a background number for the people that forgot. And then of course there's the music, and that takes a lot of coordination. Musicians being notorious in their lack of organisation. That's not all of them, obviously. So a number of people will come and help organise the sound crews, organise the lights on stage, organise the different musicians, and have a timetable for what's going to go on when. We run two main stages that don't run parallel but alternate, so you'll have one gig over there and then the next gig over there as soon as that one's finished, and you swap between ones, which seems to work as a nice idea, because then it means that you don't waste any time with sort of dead time with setup, because you can be setting up one lot while someone else is playing on the other stage. That seems to work. And then, okay, so we go to workshops. So basically we have three main strands to our workshops. There's anarchism and activism, there's DIY culture, and then there's anarcho folk music, radical performance, and music business and other practicalities around being musicians, I suppose, because we have a lot of musicians and artists on site. So the anarchism and activism, we usually do, in fact I've done it over the last couple of times, is an intro to anarchism and activism. So for some of the people who don't really know what anarchism is, but sort of like the idea, we'll come along and we'll have a basic discussion about ideas of self-reliance, non-hierarchical, anti-authoritarian, responsibility, accountability, and all those other key things about anarchism and how it works. Also, of course, pointing out the anti-capitalist stuff, and of course the anti-fascist stuff and all the rest of it. And then we'll usually have a bit of discussion, sort of round table discussion, which might be 20, 30, 40, 50 people. Lots of people bringing their ideas about their activism and talking about that. We've also had men and sexism, sexual communication and consent, sex joy and anarchy, so there's a bit of sex going on there. And also the politics of disclosure and Extinction Rebellion and other, movements, all sorts of stuff around that. I mean, and to be honest, we feel that this is one area that we've not done as well as we could have done, because we would like to have more politics and more of the hard-nosed politics. It's quite difficult to get someone who is a confident facilitator to come and step up and say, I'm going to do a presentation about this, and then we'll have a discussion. But it's something that we're always looking for: interesting ideas, interesting presenters, interesting facilitators. So if that's you, or you know somebody who you think would like to do something for the folk festivals, particularly the one in the north of Scotland, please get in touch, because that would be fantastic. Right, okay. And also, of course, there's the idea that we don't just want to be preaching to the converted, and we don't want to, we want a damn good argument, but we don't want to fall out over it. And obviously there are some things which have proved quite, I suppose, conflict-worthy over recent times. In Scotland, what we're trying to do is also create a atmosphere where we don't fall out, but we can disagree. That's what we're working on. So anyway, moving on from that, I know this is a lot of information, so I can email you my sort of cheat sheet here if you would like to. So on to DIY culture, and that's very much about people doing things like patch making and screen printing, making your own art zines, foraging in the woods for food and other stuff, natural dyeing, radical distribution networks, Linux we've had, making your own rocket stoves, a lot of stuff about permaculture and gardening and how to grow veggies and stuff, willow weaving, home brewing and wine making, graffiti art, and so on, and there's all sorts of different things, and lots of people bringing different ideas for that. And then around the anarcho folk music stuff and the radical performance stuff, we've discussed radical folk song, sort of having a bit of a skill share. So I know there's lots of people who think I would like to do more of that. How do I do it? How do I get into it? So you've got a lot of experienced musicians willing to talk about that. We've also had a bit of dance. We've had storytelling for social change. We've had acrobats and clowning, and actually teaching people about how to do certain stage performance stuff. We've also had, I think proposed for the next festival, we were going to do some stuff around musicians' mental health, and I think that particularly applies at the moment under the lockdown rules and the COVID rules. I know a lot of musicians, such as myself, we can't do gigs, or we can do very few gigs, and if that's your main source of income, then it's a bit of a problem. That can have a big toll on your mental health, and of course everybody else as well, living in a very weird time. And also somebody was going to do something about music careers outside of the music industry. That would be nice to hear. So we'll see. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the workshops are all about. So I'm going to play a little bit of music, leave you to absorb that. I'm just going to play an intro to a song again, so 20 seconds or whatever, just because I can, and it goes like this. Okay, so in terms of putting on the musical stuff, what we do at the Scottish Anarcho Folk Fest is we have 2 evenings of music, the Friday night and the Saturday night, and then usually we have a bit of an open mic or something running on the Saturday afternoon, possibly a folk sort of club thing going or something like that. So if you've got a lot of musicians who aren't actually on the bill, or people who just want to jam with each other or whatever, there's all sorts of other opportunities. And of course we try to stop the timetabled music relatively early, so midnight, 1 in the morning, so that them that want to go and jam around the fire, they can do, which of course is one of the joys of being at a festival. Is what we try to do. We try and have a balanced mix of acts, all sorts of international stuff, local stuff, obviously different representatives of different communities, and try and make sure that there's a real mix of different sorts of music as well. So obviously some people aren't going to like that music, but that's all right. And some people like some of it. To my mind, the idea of a festival is to have all sorts of different stuff going on. Now, that means that over the years, I've seen trad music from Scots, Irish, English, Spanish, Italian, Finnish, Norwegian, Polish, and so on. Lots of original singer-songwriters, folk pop bands, folk punk bands, solo artists, klezmer bands, dark folk, comedy folk, poetry, and all sorts of stuff like that. And the idea is to be as varied and inclusive as possible. And we have an open stage blackboard concert, usually running on the Saturday afternoon for untimetabled stuff, so that people who haven't been included on the bill can also play some stuff. And we do try to leave it a bit open. Now, music then obviously is a big part of the festival. Food is also an important thing. What we do in Scotland is we try and do a dinner. So lunch and dinner dinner on the Friday night, lunch and dinner on Saturday, and probably lunch on the Sunday, which is by donation. So there's a kitchen, and so we usually try to get people to sign up for that and say if they're going to eat the food or if they're going to cater for themselves, and try and make it cheap, so that a donation of a couple of quid for a meal or something like that, more if you can afford it. We do it all vegan, and we try to make it as gluten-free and sort of allergy-free as possible, so that everyone can eat it. And obviously, the vegan stuff is very important in terms of sustainability and all the rest of it, but also just in terms of inclusivity. So if you want more information about how we do that, how we've organised ourselves, please get in touch. We also have a kitchen area where you can heat up water and heat up food or whatever on some gas burners, and we have a selection of mueslis and milks, vegan milks and cow's milk for people who want it, tea and coffee, and a table share, a sort of food share table where people, if you've got more than you needed, bring that and somebody else might eat it. Okay, so then other considerations that we have, of course, the weather is one. So you have to make sure that you're kind of equipped for what happens if the heavens open and it rains all weekend and such like. But get people to dress appropriately, but also try and have enough covered spaces. As I say, we use two music venues. So we have a barn and a big marquee, and we also have other little venues for workshops and stuff like that. We have the kitchen cafe, we have cooking facilities. Of course, you need crockery, cutlery, pots and pans, kettles, tables, chairs, water supplies, water containers. Toilets, as I say, is a big one and a bit of a pain in the arse to organise, but if you've got a site that's going to be used regularly, it might be worth actually building your own. In Amsterdam, they had some fantastic composting toilets, and also they had big piles of piss bales where you can just piss into the bales, and then once they're soaked, they can just go on the land and they rot down and they go on the gardens and everything. So also you've got other issues about wood for fires, areas for camping, caravans, motorhomes, spaces for crew to sleep. Musician workshop people and ticket holders also might need somewhere to sleep or whatever. We have the issue about running the gate and making sure who gets in, and whether the people who've signed up turn up or other people who turn up on spec. That's depends on how flexible you can be. And we also have signs, information, and leaflets. Now, one big job that has to be done is, of course, the online stuff beforehand, communicating with the potential audience, and then once people have bought tickets, which we do through Eventbrite, for practical reasons, which means that Eventbrite take a cut of a couple of quid per ticket, but we thought that was worthwhile because it seems to make it easier to run it. Lots of the stuff that we have on site, like I say, is provided by the people who live there, and that's very, very useful. Otherwise, it would be a very expensive thing to make it really run perfectly. I mean, in Scotland, we have a no dogs or pets rule, which avoids disturbing the wildlife, because there's quite a lot of that on the site, and also to avoid offending people who find keeping captive animals a problem. So particularly, you know, the hardline vegans and stuff. But that's been a bit of a controversy, because some people say, why can't we bring our dogs? So we've said, look, no dogs, sorry. We don't have security, but we do have a sort of the crew, lots of whom will wear high-vis jackets and be visible on site. We're fortunate enough not to need security because we're quite remote from the nearest town. The nearest town's about 6 miles away, so we don't get much kind of walk-up people interested. People that actually would need to know it was happening and come. So, although there are always a few issues around the site, and so you do need to have good communications between the people who are in the crew. And of course, medical is quite important. We're sort of working on the idea of possibly having a trained doctor, nurse or somebody for first aiding, and then if there is a proper issue that we need an ambulance for, then we need to have systems to get them here. So far this has worked out, but I'm aware that that could be one of the areas that might be a bit sketchy. We don't sell anything else on site apart from band merch and stuff, and there's the thing about t-shirts, which I talked about earlier. So yeah, in general it's great fun. It's a fantastic opportunity for people to get together to talk about music, politics and whatever you want. It's a free space. It's a very great opportunity just to mix and get to know loads of new people and people who are kind of interested. There's always ways that we feel that we could improve, make it better, make it more interesting, make it more politically engaged. But generally, I think we do quite a good job, and the various ones around Europe, people have their different take on how they run them. If you think that you might want to do something like this, and you might have a site and you might have a crew, get in touch and we'll help you out. You know, let's share ideas, and we'll come to your festival, and then you can come to ours, and we'll see how each other does it. Anyway, so in terms of organisation, that means that we have a crew of probably about 4 or 5 or 6 of us who meet up over the 6 months before, at least once a week online or on the phone. There's loads of practical stuff that has to be sorted out, little issues, and of course, like I say, there is the thing about who does the online presence and who makes that happen. Of course, 2020 has been a bit of a disaster for festivals. We cancelled relatively early, and we're looking to do it all again in 2021. We'll see. Maybe we won't be able to, but I really hope we will. Anyway, so that's me. Like I say, if you are interested, get in touch, send us a message. Probably best to send a message either to the Facebook site or to Scottish Anarcho Folkfest at hotmail.com, and somebody will pick that up at some stage in the course of time. And I'm going to play a whole song for you. And this is a song that goes down, and you know, interestingly enough, at some of the folk festivals you hear about 3 different performers doing Bella Ciao, because it's a great song, and it goes like this. mi son svegliato. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. One early morning, as I awakened, I saw those bastards at my front door. One early morning, as I awakened, I saw those bastards at my front door. Oh partigiano, portami via. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Freedom fighter, please take me with you, for I will fight and I'm prepared to die. Oh freedom fighter, please take me with you, for I will fight and I'm prepared to die. Se io muoio da partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. If I must die there, fighting for freedom, then you must bury me where I fall. If I must die there, fighting for freedom, then you must bury me where I fall. E seppellire lassù in montagna, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Bury me there, high in the mountains, beneath the shadow of a beautiful flower. Oh bury me there, high in the mountains, beneath the shadow of a beautiful flower. Genti che passeranno, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. All the people who pass before me, they will remark what a beautiful flower. Now all the people who pass before me, they will remark what a beautiful flower. Questo fiore da partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. It's the flower of freedom, and now we'll fight and die so it can bloom. It is the flower of freedom, and I will fight and die so it can bloom. Okay, my name's James Bowen. Thanks for listening. Get in touch if you're interested. Hope to see you at some event soon, possibly in an Anarcho Folk Fest. All right, cheers. See ya.